is my list of top 10 cards that either I see go way too late, in my opinion, or cards that at first glance might look like they don't really do much or they're kind of crappy, but actually you should pick them up and they're great. So without much further ado, let's jump into it. So coming in at number 10, and this one might surprise some people, because I think if you haven't played the format much, just look at the card, you go, wow, this is actually pretty good. What is he talking about this being a sleeper? But I see routinely these things go into later half the pack, even the second to last, sometimes last pick, and quite frankly, I think it's insane. And the card I'm talking about is Liev Sky Knight. Bring it up on screen here for you. It's a 3/1 flyer that detains a creature when it comes into play. And I've had really good experiences with this thing. It's quite a lot of pressure on your opponent. This format can be pretty slow. People playing lots of colors, and aggressive decks can be pretty powerful. Now, of course, the one toughness can be an issue. There are a few ways to ping things, but for the most part, just having a 3/1 flyer for 3 is pretty good pressure. This is not so powerful of a format that this is not a good stat line. And the detain means that, it can help you win races, because if you're locking down their ground creature, or whatever they might have for a turn, yeah, let you get in unopposed. And especially you can get a few of these. I had one draft where I think I had 5 of these things. And if you can chain them turn over turn, you can really start getting in there without your opponent being able to hit you back and really swing the scales in your favor. So, yeah, Leaf Sky Knight, I think it's quite a good card, and people should be picking them more often. All right, next up on our list at number 9, we have Battlefield Promotion. Just a humble combat trick by the looks of it. You might sort of skim over this one. There are a few combat tricks in the format, and combat tricks are generally something you don't have too much space for in your deck. So it's easy to gloss over this one. And I'm not saying you have to pick this highly. They float around the packs, so you can pick these up late. But I do think they're worth including in a lot of decks, because first of all, the format has quite a few plus plus counter synergy. So if you're in any deck that touches any of that, this instantly becomes better. But even at just face value, +1/+1 and first strike wins a lot of fights that you would otherwise lose or trade in. So that can be quite powerful. The life gain on it's sort of whatever. It doesn't hurt if you're in any kind of race situation. It's nice to have that extra life, but for the most part, this is a combat trick that'll win you a lot of combats and then have an effect that sticks around. And the +1/+1 counter can matter, especially if you're putting out a flyer or something like that with evasion. And yeah, there are synergies with +1/+1 counters that can make this even better than that, where it can either apply multiple counters or with heroic creatures, it can have some sort of cool effects. So again, you don't have to pick this one too highly, but don't sleep on it. It's a really, really nice inclusion. I think one of the best combat tricks in the format. So Battlefield Promotion, you should play it if you're in white. All right, next up at number 8, we have something on quite the opposite end of the spectrum. A real slow enchantment here in Bounty of the Luxa. This one has quite a lot of text. If you haven't seen this one before, your eyes might glaze over halfway through. But basically, the short version of it is every other turn you get to draw an extra card, and every other turn from that you get to add 3 extra mana. This is slow. It takes a while before you see a lot of dividends, but I have been in quite a few matches in this format that go for 10, 15, 20 turns. I don't know. I'm not sure about the exact turn count, but you get through quite a chunk of your library. They're long games. And having something like this that your opponent can't really interact with too well, there's not a ton of ways to destroy enchantments in this format, can provide you with quite a lot of advantage turn over turn. Now, there might be matchups against aggro decks, you might have to side this out, but overall, I think this is quite a high pick. And I think people that have been playing the format for a while already know this, but if you're coming in new, this might be one where you kind of look at it and you're like, it doesn't really do anything for like when you play it, and then you get to like draw one card, and then you add some mana and you draw another card. It's like 3 or 4 turns before you really start to be happy with the effects from this, and that might seem too slow, and I think in a lot of formats it would be. But in Double Masters 2022, there's quite a few slow grinding games, and this is the kind of card that can win them for you. So Don't sleep on Bounty. If you're in those colors or just in a nice big multicolor deck, it can win quite a few matches for you. So yeah, Bounty of the Luxa, get that value. All right, next up at number 7, we have a rare, which maybe there's something about sample size here, but I have seen this card go late quite often, and I'm quite surprised at it because Jeskai Ascendancy is quite the powerhouse. I've had quite a few decks in this format that have 10 plus non-creature spells, and if you can cast even a few with this, the looting effect can help you filter into more of them so that you sort of get to keep chaining it. If you have any creatures on the board, all of a sudden they're growing. Don't forget that little untap clause on there can be quite good. Your opponent maybe attacks into you, and boom, all of a sudden you've got blockers that are untapped and it's almost one. And that's in addition to whatever the spell you cast did. So, yeah, I would have thought people would respect this card. It was certainly quite good the first time it came out, but for whatever reason, I've been seeing it go around quite late at tables, and I've been picking it up most of the time and usually been happy with the results. I think it's quite a powerful spell. It is 3 colors, so it's a bit of a commitment. You might have to find a way to splash it, but I think it is worth it quite a lot of the time. If you have a decent amount of spells, it can really do a lot of work. Again, sort of provide you that value. Make sure you can churn through the extra lands that you might not need, dig to the action you actually want, and the pump spell on the creatures can be quite powerful as well if you end up in a bit more of a board stall situation, which can happen as well. So Jeskai Ascendancy, folks, stop passing it around and take it. It's good. All right, at number 6, we have another rare, and this one, quite like Jeskai Ascendancy, works with instants and sorceries, and it is Disciple of the Ring. Now, this one takes specifically instants and sorceries rather than just non-creature spells, but most of them in the format. There's a few enchantments and artifacts you might throw out there, but mostly when you're casting non-creatures, it's instants and sorceries, so it's close enough. And Disciple of the Ring, it might not look like that much at first glance. 5 mana for 3/4 isn't super exciting. And you might think, that it is a cost, right? You have to both pay mana and exile a specific type of card from your graveyard, so it might seem like, is this really worth it? Am I gonna have enough fuel for this? But it turns out most of the time, yes, you do, and yes, it is. The tap can help you if the game's down to low life totals. You can maybe tap a creature or two, swing in for lethal. That's really nice. The counterspell mode can really put attacks on your opponent because the nice thing is, it as long as you're keeping up that 1 mana and you have something to make them pay extra, it's almost like you have that effect constantly because they can't play something into it without having to spare mana because you'll just counter it. So they're almost paying 2 extra mana for every spell, just at the threat of activation. So that's pretty nice. The pump on the Disciple itself, I think, is one of the weaker modes, but it can sometimes save it from a removal spell or something, like that's damage based, or maybe can help it win a combat. So that's all right. And then untapping a creature, not as powerful when it's on board because your opponent, won't be surprised by it necessarily, but it's still a nice option to have. If you have a big attacker, you can, again, the threat of activation can be good there. You swing with like your 6/6, and then maybe they have a couple of creatures they could swing back with, but if they do, you'll just untap your 6/6 and eat one of them. So you're almost holding them back with just the threat of activation again. And I think that's sort of the key to why this card is actually more powerful than it seems, is because even if you only have 2, 3 things in your graveyard that you can burn through, the threat of activating it often makes your opponent play around it in a way that's really advantageous to you, and you never actually have to exile those cards until you're ready for like tap effect or something. So it is another rare, so you're not going to see it super often, but yeah, don't sleep on this one. It's quite powerful. You often have decks that have a lot of fuel for it, and those effects can swing the game in your favor. So number 6, Disciple of the Ring. All right, at number 5, we have another bit of a slow blue card here in Breakthrough, which yeah, I think at a read this seems all right, but I don't see other people play it that often. I often have 1 or 2 in my deck, and I often pick them up late because they just kind of go around despite being uncommon. And again, games in this format tend to go pretty long, so having something to refuel at the end can be quite good. And if your hand's empty or you have just like 1 card, Breakthrough can be 5 mana, draw 4. And then, maybe if you have a card, you have to discard one, but that's not that big of a deal. You can often discard a land at that point. It's not too big of a deal. And yeah, it's just a really good way to refuel when you've traded one for one a bunch. You played some removal, they played some removal. There's a couple of random dorks on the board that are just staring at each other. Yeah, cast Breakthrough, draw 4 cards, and all of a sudden you're in the driver's seat. I think more decks could benefit from having one, maybe two of these in them. This isn't something you want like 5 of in your deck, but it's just a really good way to refuel. And card draw is important in this format, I think, because again, so many matchups are slow. Yeah, I would say that the majority of them. There are aggro decks in the format, and if you're facing, a quick Boros aggro deck, yeah, you probably want to side your Breakthrough out, but most matchups is going to serve you well. So, yeah, I would try to pick these up and include them in your deck if you're in blue. All right, we're up to number 4, and things are getting a little bit spicy as we look at another rare, but also one that tends to go around, and it's Glimpse the Unthinkable. Now, this one does come with a caveat. This isn't just a throw into anything type of situation, but also it can oddly be a sideboard card, so hear me out on this one. First of all, there are self-mill decks in this format. You've got sort of the spider spawning archetype, and spending a card to mill yourself 10 can be good in there. If you get enough fuel in your graveyard from that, it can more than make up for the 1 card you spent on in 2 mana, so that's one way to use it for sure. But there is also a way where you can just mill your opponent out with glimpses. There's Bloodwater Entity at common, which lets you get a spell back on top of your library. And if you can glimpse your opponent, Bloodwater glimpse them again. Like I said, the games go long a lot of the time. Milling your opponent 20 means they're often going to mill out, especially if they're playing a self-mill deck to begin with. All right, coming in at number 3, we have another combat trick, and one that's easily overlooked, and that is Supernatural Stamina. In my 20-ish drafts of this format, I don't think I've ever seen my opponents cast it once. I've had it a few times, and it's been good. Basically, the long and short of it is, there are quite a few creatures in this format that have good enter the battlefield triggers, or potentially leaf blade triggers in some cases, though those are less common. So much as Momentary Blink can be a good card in a lot of decks where, you have ETB triggers, Supernatural Stamina tends to have a very similar effect, and it has more on top of that in that you can use it as a combat trick, right? If you can block their 5/5 with your 3/3, play Supernatural Stamina, and your 3/3 is going to survive that fight, so that's pretty nice. It's pretty good with Death Touch creatures, again, sort of just giving them an extra lease on life. And you can use it to, if you have a key threat out and you haven't have black open, somebody tries to cast a removal spell, you can protect it like that. And I see people play God's Willing all the time. And obviously there are some slightly different applications, but both of them stop a removal spell. And God's Willing, again, is a commonly played card. Now, it plays better with Heroic. Supernatural Stamina is a little worse with Heroic, because if something has to leave the battlefield, then a lot of times the Heroic triggers give you counters, and that's a whole thing. Plus, in a color that doesn't really support Heroic as well. But still, I think Supernatural Stamina deserves more play than it sees, let's just say. Now, I'm not saying you have to start first picking Supernatural Stamina. The card goes late, and you should pick it up late. But if you're in black, look at your creatures, and if there's some good enters triggers or leaves triggers, or if your opponent's just running tons of removal and you need it to protect a key threat, consider Supernatural Stamina in your deck. All right, to finish out our list, we have 2 more rares, and I know there are quite a few on this list, but I feel like they're cards that maybe people don't get to play with as much, and they're a little harder to sort of estimate. And number 2 is Gifts Ungiven. Now, there's the obvious combo with Unburial Rites. That's sort of a classic in cubes across the world. You can Gifts Ungiven for Unburial Rites and some huge creature and bring it in, and that's really cool. But this isn't a cube, and even though Unburial Rites is in the format, you often don't necessarily have a gigantic thing to bring in. A lot of the really huge creatures in this format are Eldrazi, which obviously don't work with that combo. So you can maybe get a Scion of Darkness, or if you're very lucky, a Consecrated Sphinx, something like that. And those, that would obviously be good. And I don't think I need to explain to you that in that spot you'd want to pick this up. But the sort of more interesting case is just running Gifts Ungiven as a sort of value draw spell. I think it goes underestimated a lot of the time. I see it quite routinely in late picks. And I think it's just a good card advantage spell. You get to search through your deck for 4 cards. So you can get your 4 best, and your opponent's forced to give you 2 of them. So you won't get your 2 best cards, but you'll often get, the third and fourth best. That's not bad. But that's even before we start looking at the fact that there are cards with flashback in this format. There are cards with embalm in the format. There are cards that have all sorts of graveyard effects. So there's often a good set of cards you can get where you're going to get some additional value. You're going to get those 2 cards in your hand and some additional value from your graveyard. So this can often be, sort of the equivalent of like a draw 3, and it's at instant speed, which matters. Mana leaks in the format, so you can pass a turn, and maybe you mana leak their play, maybe you play your Gifts Ungiven, and you're quite happy with the result either way. So yeah, I just see this card flying around pretty late, and I think it's a good value card that you can put in most decks to refuel yourself a bit, get some graveyard value, and be happy with the results. So, consider picking this a little bit higher. All right, time for the big finale here. Number 1 on my list of top 10 sleepers in Double Masters 2022 is Privileged Position. Now, this one definitely looks like just a 5 mana brick. There are lots and lots of formats where I would just skip right over this one, wouldn't even give it a second thought, because, it's a 5 mana enchantment that doesn't really do anything the turn you play it. So that can put you behind on board, and you could lose from there quite easily. However, in this format, there are lots and lots of decks that are just chock full of removal. I've routinely had decks that have, 8, 9, 10 removal spells in them. It's not that uncommon. And that's, in addition to things like bounce and other sort of more minor effects, Miss Middlewitch, whatever. You get down Privileged Position, and it just stops all of your opponent's nonsense. It can completely blank all of their removal spells, and if their plan is to just kill all your creatures and then kill you with whatever dorks they have, well, that plan's not going to work very well anymore. Hexproof is quite a powerful mechanic, and this format's slow enough a lot of the time that I think you can afford to play a 5-mana enchantment. Just say go, and then start deploying your threats, and your opponent's not going to be able to answer them. Now, like several cards on this list, this is the sort of thing that you have to consider matchup for matchup. There might be aggressive decks where it's just too slow. There might be decks that just are removal light. They definitely do happen. The +1/+1 counters deck, the Blink deck, tend not to have so much removal, so Privileged Position maybe isn't the best inclusion there. But I'd say probably half the time you're going to face decks that have lots of removal, and slamming a Privileged Position can really make their game plan just not work whatsoever. And when you can have a card that can stop your opponent's entire strategy with just 1 card, I'd say that's something worth looking at. So I'm still on the fence on whether you should start this or include it at its sideboard, but I do think it's a powerful effect, and you shouldn't overlook it, because I know it's easy when you're drafting. There's all these sweet creatures, and do I take a removal spell? Do I take a land? And Privileged Position is this 5-mana enchantment that you just sort of read and you go, that's unimpressive. But really consider taking the Privileged Position. I think it's going to win some matches for you that you might otherwise lose. So that's my number 1 pick, and this has been my top 10 list of sleepers in the format. So let me know in the comments below if you agree, if you think I'm an idiot, if there are some other cards that you think maybe go way too late or play a lot better than they read. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from you. And look out for part number 2, where I'm going to be talking about the top 10 traps in the format. So sort of the opposite of this, cards that might look good or go early, but maybe aren't as strong as they seem. But for now, that'll do it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.